Number 9. Ford Maverick. The Ford Maverick in 1976 was in its seventh model year, the compact Ford that had debuted in April 1969 as a 1970 model, making the practical compact argument that the Falcon's buyers had transferred to it. By 1976, the Maverick had survived the oil embargo, the fuel economy conversation that 1973 had permanently installed in every American car buying decision, and the insurance changes that had reduced the grabber package's performance ambitions from the compact market. What remained was the honest compact Ford. Inline-six reliability, rear-wheel drive simplicity, and a price that the buyer who needed transportation and had a Ford dealer within 20 miles could reach without a financing conversation that exceeded the vehicle's projected service life. Its 250 cubic inch inline-six in standard configuration and the available 302 cubic inch V8 gave the Maverick buyer in 1976 the compact Ford that 1976 required. Economy with the 6, modest performance with the V8, and in both configurations a mechanical simplicity that any independent shop in any American county could address without proprietary equipment or specialized training. The Maverick is at number 9 because in 1976, the compact Ford that had been making the same practical argument since 1969 was still making it to the buyers who had always found it sufficient. And because the car that opens this list is the one most Americans drove without photographing, without discussing, and without missing until it was gone. Number 8. Chevrolet Caprice. The 1976 Chevrolet Caprice was the last of its kind. Not the last Caprice. The nameplate would continue into the next decade and beyond, but the last full-size Caprice built on the dimensions American buyers had understood as correct for the full-size American car since the early 1960s. Long overall length, wide body, a curb weight that required a V8 to move with appropriate authority, and a presence at the curb that communicated something specific about its owner's position in American economic life. In 1977, General Motors would remove approximately 800 pounds from this car, shorten it more than a foot, and continue selling it under the same name. The buyers who chose the 1976 Caprice were not warned. They were simply making what had always been the correct choice, and making it for the last time. Its 350 or 444 cubic inch V8 options, its 6-passenger interior, and its full complement of power accessories gave the Caprice buyer in 1976 the full-size American car at its final uncompromised expression. The Caprice is at number 8 because in 1976, before the engineering decision that would reduce it by 800 pounds had become a product in any showroom, the full-size Chevrolet was still being built as it had always been built. And because the American buyer who chose it in 1976 was making a decision that within 12 months would no longer be available to anyone at any American Chevrolet dealer. Number 7. Pontiac Grand Prix. In 1976, the Pontiac Grand Prix was 1 year away from the commercial peak its Colonnade farewell year would produce. 288,430 units in 1977, a 26% increase, the highest single-year production total in the Grand Prix history. In 1976, it was already among the most purchased personal luxury coupes in America, its waterfall grille and Colonnade A-body platform defining what the personal luxury Pontiac meant to the buyer who had decided to pay the Pontiac price over the Chevrolet price. The floor-shifted turbo-hydromatic, the bucket seat interior with the center console, and the available SJ trim with the 400 cubic inch V8 gave the buyer both the visual statement and the performance credential that the personal luxury segment required to be taken seriously. Its position in the General Motors hierarchy, one step above Chevrolet, one step below Buick, gave the Grand Prix buyer a declaration encoded in the nameplate on the fender that they had made the choice above the Monte Carlo and below the Riviera, and that the specific price differential between those two alternatives was where they had decided to place their automotive statement for the model year. The Grand Prix is at number 7 because in 1976 it was building toward the farewell year peak that 1977 would confirm, and because the buyers choosing it in 1976 needed no farewell to be motivated. They had already made the decision. Number 6. Chevrolet Impala. The Chevrolet Impala in 1976 was the base full-size Chevrolet, the car below the Caprice in the lineup, above the Bel Air, and positioned as the most accessible expression of the full-size Chevrolet that American families had been choosing since the nameplate's introduction in 1958. It sold in the high six figures in 1976, placing it among the most purchased passenger cars in the country, without producing a single story more interesting than the accumulated family histories of the hundreds of thousands of American households that drove one to work, to church, to the grocery store, and to school drop-off every day of the model year. The Impala's commercial argument in 1976 was identical to its commercial argument in 1965. 6 passengers, a V8, a Chevrolet dealer, and a price that the American family's income could support. Its 305 or 370 cubic inch V8 options gave the Impala buyer the full-size performance range, and its standard equipment list gave them the full-size comfort that the Caprice amplified at higher cost. The Impala is at number 6 because in 1976, the most recognizable American automotive nameplate was doing what it had always done, selling to the American family that had decided on full size, decided on Chevrolet, and decided that the Caprice's additional content was not worth the additional cost. That decision, repeated by hundreds of thousands of American families, was the Impala's entire commercial case.
Number 5. Ford LTD. The Ford LTD in 1976 placed among the top 3 best-selling passenger cars in the United States, without a cultural moment, without a performance reputation, and without generating a single conversation in any American household that began with the words, "I have always wanted the LTD." Americans chose it because it was the full-size Ford at the Ford dealer, because it seated 6, because it started every morning, and because the Chevrolet dealer was not where they had decided to go. Its 351 or 400 cubic inch V8, its select-shift cruise-o-matic automatic, and its body-on-frame construction gave the full-size Ford buyer the American car experience at the Ford price, in the last year before fuel cost and insurance recalculations would make the accommodation feel less comfortable than it still felt in 1976. The LTD's at number 5 because in 1976, the third best-selling passenger car in America required no enthusiasm, no loyalty, and no particular rationale beyond the practical decision to go to a Ford dealer. And because the car that hundreds of thousands of American families drove in 1976 without examining why they chose it over the Impala, the Caprice, or the LeSabre, is the most honest commercial document of what the American full-size market actually was in the mid-decade, as opposed to what the automotive press was publishing about what it was becoming in the years that followed. Number 4. Pontiac Firebird. The Pontiac Firebird in 1976 was 12 months away from the film that would transform it. On June 3, 1977, Smokey and the Bandit would open, and the black and gold Trans Am would become the most desired car in the country before summer ended. In 1976, they were selling to buyers who had discovered the car through the automotive press, the performance community, or the second-generation body's visual argument alone: the long hood, the low roofline, the shaker scoop on the Trans Am's hood, without the cultural amplifier that a $127 million box office would provide 12 months later. The 1976 Trans Am's 455 cubic inch V8, in its final year of production, paired with Pontiac's radio-tuned suspension, made the performance argument on its own terms. It was also the year Pontiac celebrated its 50th anniversary with the first black and gold special edition featuring Hearst T-tops, setting the visual template for what Smokey and the Bandit would make famous in 1977. The Firebird is at number 4 because in 1976, the car that Burt Reynolds would make the most recognized American performance vehicle of the decade was being chosen by buyers who needed no film to decide. Buyers who had concluded its visual and mechanical argument was sufficient before it had been projected on any screen. A year later, 40 million Americans would reach the same conclusion in a darkened theater. In 1976, The buyers already there deserve the first acknowledgement.
Number 3. Ford Granada. Ford placed the 1976 Granada next to a Mercedes-Benz 280 in its advertising and asked American consumers which one they preferred to pay for. The Mercedes-Benz marketing department was not consulted. The comparison was legally defensible and commercially effective. The Granada sold over 400,000 units in 1976, its peak production year in the nameplate's history, placing it among the top 5 best-selling passenger cars in America. The buyer was purchasing a story, the story of a formally styled, European-influenced compact at a price the American compact market had established as accessible. Ford had identified that in 1976, what a car communicated about its driver was commercially as significant as what it actually contained under its hood or inside its door panels. Its 250 cubic inch inline-6 or 302 cubic inch V8, its Maverick-derived unibody platform, and its formal roofline gave the Granada buyer the visual premium over the domestic compact at a price the Buick buyer's market research had not anticipated would be reachable from a Ford showroom. The Granada is at number 3 because over 400,000 Americans in 1976 found Ford's comparison to a Mercedes-Benz sufficient reason to purchase the compact Ford that made it, and because the car that built its entire sales argument on a borrowed European identity reached the top 5 in American passenger car sales in the very year it made that argument most loudly and with a straight face. Number 2. Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The Chevrolet Monte Carlo in 1976 wore its new stacked rectangular headlights, arranged vertically in pairs at the outer edges of the formal grille that distinguished the 1976 from the round headlamp predecessors. Its colonnade A-body platform, its 350 cubic inch V8, its velour interior, and its formal roofline communicated the mid-decade American aspiration precisely: the appearance of personal luxury at a Chevrolet price, available from the most accessible dealer network in the country. The Monte Carlo outsold the Grand Prix, the Chrysler Cordova, and the Ford Thunderbird in the personal luxury segment. Its only competition was the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, making the identical argument from the showroom that General Motors had positioned at strategic intervals along the same American commercial strip. Its buyers were purchasing a statement about where they had arrived in the decade, a statement that at a Chevrolet price was within reach of the buyer who could not yet make the same statement from a Buick or Oldsmobile showroom. The Monte Carlo is at number 2 because in 1976 it was the most commercially successful personal luxury coupe in America at its price point, and because the only car selling more in the same market was doing so from the Oldsmobile showroom next door, which is not a defeat so much as a description of how thoroughly the personal luxury mid-size coupe had come to dominate the American automotive market in the mid-decade.
Number 1. Oldsmobile Cutlass. The Oldsmobile Cutlass had been the best-selling passenger car in the United States in 1975. In 1976, it repeated. For the second consecutive year, the Cutlass Supreme outsold the Impala, the LTD, the Monte Carlo, the Grand Prix, and every other passenger car in the American market. Not by the margins the Impala's million-unit years had established, but by the margin a personal luxury mid-size car produces when American buyers have decided that the full-size car is more than they need and the compact is less than they want. The Cutlass had found the space between those two markets and occupied it with a 350 or 455 cubic inch V8, a colonnade body in its definitive form, and a supreme trim that communicated personal luxury at an Oldsmobile price the Buick buyer recognized as a step below without resenting it.
The Cutlass is at number 1 because in 1976, it was the best-selling passenger car in America for the second consecutive year, and because the car that accomplished that from the mid-size personal luxury segment against full-size cars that had held the title for the previous decade had found a market the American buyer had not known it needed until the Cutlass showed them exactly what it was. In 1977, the Cutlass would fall from first place, not because its sales declined, but because the downsized Caprice and Impala arrived and produced 657,000 combined units. The Cutlass would sell more in 1977 than in either championship year and still lose the title.